When he walked into her school that day, he never imagined what he would find. But as he entered the lunchroom, a sight so cruel and unjust would change everything. A frog, lifeless and unseasoned, sat on his daughter's plate, served only to her. What followed next would ignite a fire that no one could put out. Before continuing this story, let us know in the comments section, where are you watching from today? Let's begin to the story. The morning sun broke softly through the long windows of Shaquille O'Neal's home, casting golden light over the smooth, hardwood floors. It was a quiet Friday in Atlanta, the kind of day that asked for peace. But something in Shaq's heart stirred. He stood at the kitchen counter, a large mug of coffee nestled in his massive hands. His 7 feet 1 inch frame filled the room effortlessly. But today, his presence felt gentle. The house around him buzzed faintly with the sounds of a city waking up. Birds chirped outside. The hum of morning traffic drifted in through the slightly cracked window. Shaq stared out for a long time, his mind somewhere else. On the fridge, a single photo was stuck with a magnet shaped like a heart. It was a picture of him and his daughter, Amara, taken a few months ago at the park. She had her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, and her smile was bright enough to light the sky. That photo had been taken during a picnic, just the two of them, when she had confided in him that she felt different at school. That conversation had stayed with him like a whisper in the back of his mind. He hadn't told her he would visit today. He didn't want to ask permission. He just wanted to show up, to remind her she was seen, loved, protected. A surprise. Something simple but powerful. Shaq tapped the mug against his lip thoughtfully, then nodded to himself. He moved through the house with quiet energy, grabbing a soft bouquet of yellow daisies, Amara's favorite, from the vase near the front door. He had picked them fresh from the garden the day before. A small lunchbox rested on the kitchen island, one he'd packed himself with grilled chicken, fresh fruit, and a note. "To my little queen, Dad loves you always." He grabbed both items and slipped on his sunglasses. His soft footsteps echoed as he walked out the front door. Years earlier, a 5-year-old Amara sat on the living room floor, knees pulled to her chest, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her skin was darker than the dolls her classmates brought to school. She had asked Santa for a Barbie, and what she received felt like a stranger. Shaq had knelt beside her, his giant hand softly brushing her curls from her face. "Why you cryin', baby girl?" he had asked, his deep voice full of warmth. "I don't look like the other girls. They said I'm different." He had taken a long breath, his face soft but firm. "You are different," he said gently. "And that's your power. Look at your skin. Like warm bronze. Look at your hair. Strong, bold, like your mama's. You come from kings and queens, from poets and warriors." She sniffled, still not convinced. Shaq stood, then carefully lifted her onto his lap. "People who don't understand your beauty will try to make you feel small, but you never let them. You stand tall, you walk proud. You hear me?" She nodded slowly, laying her head against his chest. His heartbeat was strong beneath her ear. "Say it with me," he whispered. "I am not less." "I am not less," she echoed softly. "I am made of greatness." "I am made of greatness." He kissed the top of her head and held her close. "That's my girl." Back to the present. As Shaq's black Escalade rolled into the school parking lot, the usual noise of kids playing, laughing, and running around echoed in the spring air. The building was clean and well-maintained, a typical suburban elementary school with red bricks, white-trimmed windows, and a bright blue sign out front that read, "Riverstone Elementary, where all kids shine." Shaq parked in the visitor's lot and stepped out, the sunlight glinting off his shades. The moment he unfolded from the vehicle, heads turned. Even in a city full of celebrities, Shaquille O'Neal was impossible to miss. A few parents did double takes. Some children on the playground froze, eyes wide. "Is that Shaq?" one boy whispered, mouth open, like he'd just seen a superhero. Shaq smiled, tilting his head with a soft chuckle. "Don't worry. I ain't here to dunk on nobody today," he said warmly, tossing the boy a wink. He adjusted the flowers in his arm and headed toward the main building, moving with calm confidence. Every step seemed to echo with history. He wasn't just a basketball legend. He was a father, a protector, a man with a mission. At the front desk, a young receptionist, early 30s, friendly but visibly nervous, blinked up at him. Hello, Mr. O'Neill. Can I help you?" Shaq lowered his shades and offered a gentle smile. "Just here to surprise my daughter, Amara." "Brought her lunch and some flowers." The receptionist's eyes softened. "That's really sweet. Let me get someone to walk you down." A few moments later, he was led down the hallway by a school counselor named Mr. Jennings, a tall, thin man with glasses and a kind face. He clearly recognized Shaq but tried to remain professional. "So, Amara's in Mrs. Kingsley's class right down here," Jennings said as they passed rows of colorful student art lining the walls. Shaq glanced at the drawings, pausing briefly at one. It was Amara's. A simple sketch of two figures, one tall, one small, standing in a field of sunflowers. The caption read, "Me and my daddy." "He makes me feel safe." Shaq's throat tightened. He blinked a few times and nodded. "Thank you, man," he said quietly to Jennings. "No problem. I'll leave you here so you can surprise her." As the counselor walked off, Shaq stood still in the hallway. His hand gripped the bouquet a little tighter. He took a deep breath and knocked gently on the classroom door. The door creaked slightly as Shaq pushed it open. The classroom, bathed in soft morning light, was filled with neatly arranged desks, colorful posters, and the faint scent of dry erase markers. A soft murmur of voices halted the moment the children noticed the giant silhouette in the doorway. All heads turned. Even the teacher, Ms. Kingsley, paused mid-sentence, her marker freezing on the whiteboard. Amara's eyes lifted from her desk. Her face was serious, quiet, until she saw him. "Daddy!" she gasped, her voice small but bursting with surprise. She stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Her dark curls bounced around her face as she ran across the room and straight into his arms. Shaq knelt and scooped her up like she weighed nothing. His massive hands wrapped around her tiny frame, and he lifted her effortlessly. Amara clung to him like a koala, her face buried in his neck, her fingers digging into his back. "I missed you, Daddy," she whispered. "I missed you more, baby girl," he said, pressing his cheek to her temple. "Brought you flowers and lunch. Couldn't let my princess eat cafeteria mystery nuggets on a Friday." The children giggled quietly. Even a few of the more nervous ones relaxed at the sight of the warm exchange. But Ms. Kingsley stood frozen. She was in her mid-40s with silver blonde hair pinned tightly at the back, thin lips, and pale blue eyes that rarely smiled. She wore a stiff beige cardigan and a pearl necklace that didn't move when she did. Her smile was forced now, but professional. "Well, this is quite the surprise," she said with a tone that didn't match her words. "We normally ask visitors to give notice before interrupting class time." Shaq turned slightly, still holding Amara. "Wasn't trying to interrupt. Just wanted to drop off lunch. Won't take long." Ms. Kingsley nodded, but her eyes flicked toward Amara with something unreadable. Then back to Shaq. "Very well. I suppose, since you're here, we can make a small exception." Shaq slowly stood, placing Amara back on the floor. She kept one hand on his arm, not ready to let go just yet. The room began to settle. Kids whispered to one another, some still watching with curious awe. A boy with freckles leaned toward his friend and whispered, That's her dad? Whoa. Shaq turned to Ms. Kingsley. Would it be all right if I joined her for lunch in the cafeteria? There was a flicker of hesitation in her expression. Just a flicker, but it was there. Her smile returned, stiff as drywall. Of course, she said. Lunch is in 10 minutes. You're free to wait in the hall if you like. He nodded slowly. Cool. Shaq stepped back into the hallway, leaving the door slightly ajar. His hands gently cradled the bouquet of flowers. He stared ahead, but his ears were tuned to the soft sounds inside. Pencils scratching paper, chairs shifting, Ms. Kingsley's clipped voice giving instructions. Then he heard something, a faint but sharp tone. Amara, that's not how we behave when guests arrive, Ms. Kingsley said, just loud enough to be heard through the cracked door. Please compose yourself. You're not at home. Silence. Shaq's brows furrowed. He leaned a little closer, jaw tightening. His hand instinctively curled into a gentle fist, then relaxed. He took a breath and pulled out his phone instead, pretending to scroll. But his mind wasn't on any screen. 10 minutes passed, like an hour. The cafeteria was painted in bright colors. Murals of fruits, healthy food pyramids, and cartoon mascots that tried to make broccoli look cool. Long tables stretched across the space, filled with chattering children and tired lunch staff. There was laughter. There were loud trays. There was the unmistakable sound of milk cartons popping open. Shaq entered with Amara by his side, her tiny hand still clutching his. Her backpack bounced lightly against her back. She looked up at him, smiling now, proud to have her dad there. Shaq beamed. You ready for a fancy lunch date with your old man? Yes, sir, she said, eyes sparkling. He opened the small lunchbox and set her food on the table. The grilled chicken, orange slices, and 2 little cupcakes brought an excited squeal from Amara. He handed her the flowers. For you, he said, smiling. She pressed them to her nose, inhaling deeply. They smell like sunshine, she whispered. Shaq chuckled. That's what love smells like. She leaned over the table and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. For a moment, everything was perfect, until it wasn't. Shaq and Amara sat across from each other at the cafeteria table. Laughter and casual noise continued around them, but within their little space, it felt like a quiet world. He watched her eat, her small hands neatly cutting her chicken, her legs swinging under the bench. Every now and then, she'd look up at him and smile. One of those shy, heart-melting smiles that made everything else disappear. Shaq grinned. Slow down, girl. You eatin' like you got a game to play after this. Amara giggled and took a sip of her juice. This is way better than what they usually give us. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Oh, yeah? What do they usually give y'all? She shrugged. Stuff. Sometimes pizza, sometimes soup. It's not that bad. There was something in her voice, hesitation. Shaq noticed it, but didn't push. Not yet. A moment later, her class began filtering into the cafeteria. Ms. Kingsley was at the back of the line, arms crossed, overseeing her students, like a cold wind moving through the room. Amara's smile dimmed slightly. Shaq turned and saw her watching the teacher with careful eyes. You okay, baby? He asked gently. She nodded quickly. Yeah. The students grabbed trays and sat at the table next to them. Conversations resumed, some loud, some quiet. But within moments, a different mood began to settle. Shaq could feel it before he could see it. Laughter. Then silence. Amara's eyes dropped to her tray. Shaq followed her gaze and froze. There, sitting in the middle of her original school-issued lunch tray, not the one he had packed, was something that didn't belong in any cafeteria. A small, lifeless frog, dead, cold. Its tiny limbs were curled inward like it had been frozen in fear, uncooked, unseasoned, its glassy eyes staring forward. Amara's mouth trembled. Her fingers tightened around her juice box. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't sob. She just sat there, frozen. The kids around her began laughing. Not loudly, but with an awkward, unsure energy. Like they didn't understand what was happening. Only that it was strange. Some looked uncomfortable. A few just stared at the frog, wide-eyed. Shaq didn't move at first. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. A dead frog. On his daughter's tray. He looked at her again. Amara. Her lower lip quivered. She said it's what people like us eat, she whispered. His heart slammed inside his chest. What? She said it's what people like us eat, Amara repeated, quieter this time. Before I sat down. The sound of the cafeteria faded. Everything blurred. All Shaq could hear was the pounding of blood in his ears. He stood slowly. The metal bench scraped against the floor with a shrill cry. Every child at the table went silent. The laughter stopped. The air thickened. Shaq reached down and gently took the tray in his hand, holding it like it was something diseased. The frog's limp body shifted slightly, a grotesque little flop. He turned. Ms. Kingsley was walking toward their table with a clipboard in hand. Her expression was neutral, almost smug, like someone preparing to spin a story before being asked. Shaq's chest rose and fell. Ms. Kingsley, he said, his voice even, though it shook slightly. She stopped a few feet away. Yes? He held up the tray. You see this? She tilted her head slightly. I see a biology specimen, it looks like. Biology specimen, his voice cracked. In a lunch tray, given to a child? Ms. Kingsley smiled politely, but her eyes were sharp. There must be some confusion. That isn't from the cafeteria. It's clearly a mistake. Amara's voice came again, barely audible. She gave it to me herself. Shaq's jaw clenched. His hands were shaking now. Are you trying to tell me my daughter imagined this? He asked, staring down the teacher. I'm simply saying, Ms. Kingsley said, her voice brittle like thin ice, that sometimes children misunderstand things. Maybe she brought it from science class, or she said it's what people like us eat. The words hung in the air like poison. Children were watching. Teachers had paused. Cafeteria workers froze behind the counter. The room was filled with eyes. Shaq took a step forward, towering above the teacher now. You think this is funny? He said, his voice low, filled with rage held back like a dam about to break. You think this is some kind of joke? I think you're overreacting, she replied. This isn't overreacting, Shaq boomed, his voice echoing through the cafeteria. Every table stopped. He held the tray high, then slammed it down on a nearby table with a crack, the frog bouncing and landing with a sick thud. Kids jumped. A few gasped. Amara flinched. Shaq pointed at Ms. Kingsley. You just humiliated my daughter. You gave her that thing and said it was what people like us eat? You think I'm going to walk out of here and pretend that didn't happen? The principal, Mr. Hollins, a short, anxious man in his 50s, with graying hair and sweat forming around his temples, rushed into the cafeteria. Mr. O'Neill, please, he said, breathless. Let's step into my office. We can discuss this calmly. There's no calm after you let that happen, Shaq growled, his voice vibrating the walls. I trusted this school with my daughter, and you let this woman serve her a dead frog like some kind of twisted message. Ms. Kingsley's face was tight now. She looked less smug, more alarmed. She's exaggerating, she started. Shaq stepped closer. She's a child. She doesn't lie like this. She doesn't make this up. I taught her to speak truth, to stand tall, and today, she had to sit here while a room full of people laughed at her pain. The cafeteria was dead quiet now. Not a whisper. Not a single sound except Shaq's heavy breathing. He pulled out his phone. "Mr. O'Neill, please," the principal said, reaching out. Shaq backed away. "No," he said. "I'm done talking. I'm calling 911. Ms. Kingsley's eyes widened for the first time. Shaq's voice was flat as he dialed. "Yes. I'd like to report a case of child endangerment. Racial targeting. My name is Shaquille O'Neal. I'm at Riverstone Elementary. My daughter was served a dead animal as food, with a racial slur attached to it." "Yes, I'll wait." He turned and looked at Amara. She sat there, flowers still in hand, tears falling freely now. He walked back to her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I got you," he whispered, and this time she believed him. 2 police officers entered, 1 male, 1 female. They were calm but alert, scanning the room. Shaq stood beside them now, explaining what happened in a quiet voice. Amara sat at a nearby table, surrounded by a few concerned kids, her tray still untouched beside her. Ms. Kingsley stood at a distance, arms folded, lips tight. The officers took statements. A few students came forward. Camilla, Amara's quiet friend, nervously explained what she saw. A boy from another table described hearing the "it's what people like you eat" comment. The evidence piled up. Ms. Kingsley began to sweat. Her voice cracked when she spoke to the officers. She blamed a classroom experiment. She said it was misinterpreted. She claimed Amara had laughed along, a lie no one believed. Outside, news was spreading. A teacher had done what to Shaquille O'Neal's daughter. Parents began arriving early for pickup. A reporter from the local paper showed up, camera ready. The school was now a spotlight. There was no turning back. Shaq didn't want this attention. He didn't want his daughter in the headlines. But he knew this had to be seen. There were too many stories like this that stayed hidden. Not this time. Back in the classroom, later that day, Amara sat at her desk, silent. Her books were open, but her eyes were on the floor. The room was quieter than usual. Ms. Kingsley wasn't there. Mr. Bain walked in instead, the art teacher. He stood at the front of the room with a calm, warm energy. "Hi, everyone," he said. "Today, I'll be here instead of your usual teacher. We're going to do something different." He passed out blank sheets of paper and colored pencils. "I want you to draw a picture of a place you feel safe. Anywhere, real or imagined." The kids began to draw. Amara sat still for a long time. Then, slowly, she picked up a pencil. She began to draw a giant man, kneeling beside a little girl, placing a hand on her shoulder. In the corner of the drawing she wrote, "My daddy's hands." The story didn't stay in the school walls for long. It took just one photo. One single photo. Amara sitting at the cafeteria table, her eyes red, a dead frog on her tray, and Shaquille O'Neal standing behind her with his hand clenched and sorrow in his eyes. The photo hit social media by 3:47 p.m. By 4:30 p.m., it had more than 40,000 shares. By sunset, it had gone viral. The internet explodes. "Justice for Amara, your dead frog lunch." Shaq speaks. TikTok creators lit up with reactions. Parents wept on camera. Activists called it a symbol of how schools still quietly harm black children every day. A woman from Ohio made a video. They gave that baby a dead frog to eat and told her it's what people like her eat. In 2025, number no more. Celebrities spoke up. NBA players, singers, actors, even politicians. And Shaq, usually quiet on social media, posted just one sentence on X, formerly Twitter. "You don't mess with a child's dignity, ever." At home, Shaq sat in his living room with Amara curled beside him, her tiny head on his chest, eyes closed. She was exhausted. The house was quiet, but the outside world roared, phones buzzed, messages flooded in, His manager called, saying news stations wanted interviews. Shaq said no. Not yet. My daughter comes first. Later that night, he sat alone in the kitchen. He looked at the frog drawing Amara had made in art class the week before. She'd been so proud of it, a silly, colorful picture of a cartoon frog in sunglasses. Now, the image hurt. The next morning. By 8 a.m., the school had released a weak official statement. We are investigating a deeply concerning incident involving a student's lunch experience. We take all reports of inappropriate behavior seriously and are cooperating with local authorities. It didn't name Amara. It didn't name Ms. Kingsley. It didn't say sorry. People were furious. A protest formed outside the school gates before the first bell. Parents held signs, "Protect our children, dignity, not discrimination. Amara deserves better." News vans rolled up. Helicopters hovered overhead. Police stood watch. Shaq didn't go to the protest. He stayed with Amara. But the whole world now knew the truth. At first, it was just Amara. But within 24 hours, more parents came forward. One mother, Latina, said Ms. Kingsley had mocked her son's accent when he read aloud in class. Another, a father, said his daughter was made to sit in the back because her hair was too distracting. A third, a boy, remembered being told that his people were good at running, not reading. The pattern was clear. The school had looked the other way for years. Shaq called a lawyer, not for money, but for accountability. 3 days later, Ms. Kingsley was placed on leave. The school board made the announcement in a tight-lipped press conference. One board member stammered through a statement. "We regret that an incident of this nature occurred. Pending further investigation, we are committed to equity in education." They still didn't say her name. They still didn't say Amara's. But it didn't matter anymore. Everyone knew. Ms. Kingsley's photo leaked that evening, middle-aged, sharp eyes, pale skin. Her expression, cold. She looked exactly like what Amara had described. A teacher who smiled when hurting you. People recognized her face. And the truth? It was too loud to ignore now. By the end of the week, Shaq finally sat down for an interview. Not with a flashy network. Just a calm, heart-level talk with a local black journalist named Tamika Hart. He wore a simple gray hoodie. No makeup, no lights. Just a father. "I didn't want this attention," he said softly, eyes heavy. "But I had to speak." He looked at the camera. "My daughter was humiliated, made to feel less than human. That's not a mistake. That's a system." He held up Amara's drawing, the one of his hands. "She told me, 'Daddy, your hands are the only place I feel safe now.' That broke me." His voice cracked. "I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I'm famous. I'm strong. But even I couldn't protect her that day. So now, I'm going to make sure this never happens to another little girl. Ever again." The interview aired that night. The world leaned in and listened. The police conducted interviews. The Department of Education sent in a review team. Emails surfaced. A staff member anonymously leaked records showing Ms. Kingsley had received multiple complaints over the years. Most were ignored. Some were resolved internally. One was dismissed because the parent was too emotional to be reliable. That email hit the press. It caused outrage. The principal, Mr. Larkin, gave a nervous apology. The school board called an emergency town hall meeting, and Shaq? He kept showing up. To the school, to Amara's therapy sessions, to community forums where other parents told their own stories. He had become more than a father. He had become a voice. Out of all this pain, something began to grow. A new group formed, DADS for Dignity, started by Shaq and a few local fathers who had stayed quiet too long. They met weekly, talked with teachers, visited schools across the city, and the message was simple. Every child deserves respect. Every voice matters. We will not let racism hide behind silence anymore. They didn't scream. They didn't threaten. They showed up, in suits, in hoodies, in quiet strength. And people noticed. It was early morning, the sky still gray, as Shaquille O'Neal stepped onto the courthouse steps in a tailored black suit. Behind him walked Amara and her mother Tiana, flanked by their attorney Jasper Cole, a calm, sharp, middle-aged man known for winning civil rights cases others were too afraid to take. Media surrounded the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. Shaq paused, towering above them all. His voice was calm, but it echoed with weight. We're here today not for attention, not for drama. We're here because a line was crossed, and we're not letting that go quiet. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Ms. Kingsley, pale and stiff in a gray blazer, sat with her lawyer. She avoided eye contact with everyone. The charges? Child endangerment. Hate-related misconduct in an educational setting. Psychological harm to a minor? Her defense. An unfortunate joke gone wrong. But the courtroom wasn't laughing. Amara sat quietly beside her father, clutching a small stress ball, shaped like a sunflower. Her eyes stayed locked on the judge. She was scared, but also ready. First up was Principal Halverson, who claimed ignorance. I had no idea she was being mistreated. Ms. Kingsley had a clean record. Jasper Cole raised one eyebrow. Clean record, or quietly erased complaints? Halverson fumbled. Then came two parents from the school, both black, who described how their children had also been treated unfairly. My son was told his hair was too wild for learning, one mother said. Another added, my daughter got detention for defending herself. Ms. Kingsley said, girls like her get aggressive easily. Each testimony struck like thunder. Everyone held their breath when the judge called her name. Shaq squeezed her hand before she rose. Amara walked slowly to the stand. She climbed into the chair, her sunflower ball in her lap. Jasper Cole approached gently. Amara, can you tell us what happened that day? She nodded. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. She gave me a frog, on a tray. Everyone laughed. She said it was what people like me eat. Did you feel safe? No. Did she ever apologize? Number. She smiled. The courtroom was silent. A tear slid down Shaq's cheek as he watched his daughter, so small, yet standing so tall. Her lawyer tried to twist the story. She was trying to make a lesson out of cultural diversity. She misread a science assignment. She has a quirky sense of humor. But the jury saw through it, especially when security footage was shown. Ms. Kingsley smirking as she placed the frog on Amara's tray, whispering something to the students beside her. No sound, but expressions say everything. And hers spoke volumes. After 3 days of testimony, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts, Ms. Kingsley's expression finally cracked. Her lips parted. Her eyes darted. She gasped. She was sentenced to 1 year in county jail community service and anti-bias programs. Permanently banned from teaching justice wasn't everything, but it was something. The school district faced massive pressure. Under protest from parents, local leaders, and national media, the superintendent resigned. New leadership was appointed, diverse, qualified, and community-focused. Mandatory anti-racism training was introduced for all staff. A new policy allowed students to anonymously report mistreatment. Shaq attended the first training session himself, not as a celebrity, but as a father. He sat in the back, arms folded, eyes focused. 2 weeks later, Shaq was invited to speak at a national rally for children's rights and anti-racism in schools. Thousands filled the park. Signs waved, "Protect our kids." No child left behind or behind bars. We believe Amara. He stepped up to the podium. His voice rolled deep and steady. I never thought I'd have to use my voice like this. not for something like this. But when your child is hurt, when they're made to feel less than human, there's no sitting quiet, the crowd cheered. He paused, then added, "This isn't just about Amara. This is about every child who gets dismissed, silenced, or ignored because of how they look. And to all the kids watching, I see you, I hear you, and I'll fight for you." Thunderous applause. Some were crying. Shaq stepped down, and Amara ran into his arms. Amara returned to class soon after. This time, there was no frog on her tray. Just a lunch she liked, friends beside her, and a new teacher who greeted her with respect. And when a younger student was teased in the hallway, Amara stepped in. "Don't talk to her like that." Confidence in her voice, calm in her eyes, power in her presence. That night, Shaq tucked her in and asked, "Proud of yourself?" She nodded sleepily. "Yeah, me too," he whispered. He kissed her forehead, then whispered one more thing. "You're changing the world, Amara." 1 year later, the auditorium was packed. Parents in folding chairs, teachers lined up in the back, students fidgeting in their seats. At the front, a large banner stretched across the stage. "Rising Voices, Student Leadership Awards Ceremony." The lights dimmed. A name was called. Amara O'Neill, Leadership Award for Courage and Positive Change. Shaq stood in the crowd, his eyes immediately misting. He wasn't alone this time. Beside him stood Tiana, her arm wrapped around his. Behind them sat Dr. Nia Roberts, Principal Marcus, the school's new principal, Jasper Cole, and Ms. Lopez, all smiling proudly. The crowd clapped, but Shaq didn't clap. He placed a hand on his heart and just watched. Watched his daughter walk tall across that stage. Amara wore a soft yellow dress that shimmered under the lights. Her curls were pinned with tiny sunflower clips, a nod to her therapy sessions. She didn't look nervous. She looked ready. She stepped up to the mic, took a deep breath, and spoke. "Hi, everyone. My name is Amara O'Neill Paz. I used to be really quiet, not because I didn't have things to say, but because I didn't think people would listen." A hush fell over the room. "Last year, something happened to me that was really scary and sad. It made me feel small. It made me feel like I didn't belong. But then, people showed me I do belong. My dad, my mom, my teachers now, my friends." She looked out at the audience, her voice growing stronger. "And I realized that what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. Not ever. So I promised myself I'd speak up, not just for me, but for any kid who's ever been made to feel like they don't matter." Her words wrapped around the room like light. "I want to be a teacher when I grow up, a nice one who sees every child, one who listens, one who believes." Then her voice softened. "They tried to feed me hate." She glanced at her dad. "But my father taught me how to rise." The room exploded in applause. People stood. Shaq wiped his face with the back of his hand, laughing softly through his tears. "She did it," he whispered. "She really did it." A crowd gathered around Amara, kids asking for pictures, teachers shaking her hand. Tiana stood back, letting the moment be hers. Shaq finally stepped in, towering above everyone. Amara turned and ran into his arms. "You were amazing," he said, lifting her off the ground. "You proud of me?" she asked. "I've always been proud of you," she smiled. "I wasn't scared this time." "I know," he said, kissing her forehead. "You're brave." She held his hand tightly as they walked out of the school doors, the sun setting behind them. Amara sat in the back seat, humming softly to herself. Shaq glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Hey, you still want to be a teacher?" "Yep, but I might also write a book." "Oh yeah? What about?" she grinned. "About frogs, but not the scary kind, the magic kind." Shaq laughed, his deep chuckle filling the car. "That's my girl." Back home, the award sat on the fireplace mantel. A small plaque, simple and beautiful, for courage and leadership. Amara O'Neill. Below it was a framed photo. Shaq holding her hand on the courthouse steps. Both smiling, both strong. The camera pans out. A father, a daughter, a legacy that started with pain, but bloomed into power. Because sometimes the smallest voices are the ones that change everything. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know about your thoughts in the comment section. Also, subscribe the channel for daily stories notification.